In your wanderings, you stumble upon a ruined temple buried deep within the heart of the forest. Wary, you continue on through thick overgrowth until you see a clearing that was once an ancient cathedral built by people, now rebuilt by nature itself. In the center is a preserved altar, stacked with various dice of all shapes and colors. As you contemplate what this means, a cloaked figure approaches from the shadows.
Welcome, brave adventurer. Have you come to roll the dice? Explore strange new worlds with new strange rules? If you seek adventure worthy of being shared with good friends, you have come to the right place. Just roll for initiative.
Welcome to the Nat One Nerds podcast.
Welcome to the table, everyone.
Hey guys, welcome back to Nat One Nerds. We're glad to bring you another episode on the One Ring.
Yes, and we're going to be diving into the Loremaster's perspective for this episode.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun in the one-shot. Hopefully you guys were able to listen to it. We had Parker as the Loremaster, and I would like to apologize in advance. I've been a little sick, so if my voice sounds funny, that's why.
It's okay. People like you, man.
Hopefully. I don't think they'd be listening if they didn't.
Yeah, no, we had a lot of fun. I mean, obviously, it was our very first time ever playing the system, fresh from just reading the rule book and just diving in. But hopefully that allowed you guys to gain insight into the system without feeling like you have to measure up to people who have been playing a system for years upon years.
Yeah, we're definitely newbies when we're trying systems out, but we try to give you the best exposure we can so you can really decide which ones are for you and what you like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which I kind of like, because I know, like, if you take D&D, for example, just because, again, that's our foundation for sure. When a lot of people get introduced to D&D, like, through things like Critical Role, and then they try to jump into the system, but they're comparing themselves to Matt Mercer and all them, and that is by far a unfair comparison. And that's honestly an unfair comparison for people that have been a dungeon master or running D&D games for years upon years.
Yeah, that's one thing that I find myself fortunate about is, ironically, as a podcaster, I don't personally have the attention span to listen to someone play through an entire game. Like, I had to break it up into segments, so I never really got into any of those Critical Role or anything like that, so I didn't really have anything to compare myself to when I first started playing or DMing.
Well, that's kind of another thing we kind of hope with this whole podcast is that you guys can see that we're just as new. We're figuring out just along with you guys. We're no different. We're just as bad.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole concept is Nat One, right? So
Yeah. So with your first time playing the system and also being the Loremaster, Parker, what were your thoughts on the One Ring system?
oh gosh, I'm already going to jump the gun, man. I'm going to say this is my favorite system we've explored so far.
Yeah, you really did seem to enjoy it. Granted, if they gave PhDs in Tolkien, you'd probably have 3 by now, so this is like your home field.
Yeah, I mean, I can still do my thesis on Tolkien. I'm an English major, so no, and that was so exciting because this is, I mean, really, I think for a lot of like fantasy-based TTRPGs, I feel like setting is a huge factor. Playing in a setting like Middle Earth, where Tolkien spent most of his
His life?
yeah, essentially his life. I was gonna say his whole career almost, which would probably be similarly accurate. He spent all this time just building. I mean, he was building the world well before he wrote even The Hobbit, let alone The Lord of the Rings. And he's like, oh, I guess we can do a story within this world, like an actual proper narrative rather than a historical narrative or like a historical point of view of what's going on.
I mean, from the perspective of someone who has created their own like fantasy world for writing stories in, once you have that world built, I can say it's so much fun to really get into it, make stories, and develop this culture. And it honestly just kind of takes life of its own. So I can really see where he comes from.
Yeah, and that it makes sense why a lot of people like Dungeons and Dragons or even Fate or Call of Cthulhu, or a lot of other TTRPGs, a lot of them will eventually, once they get to a certain level of being comfortable, they do their own homebrew world. And I can understand kind of why, because once you do kind of create that homebrew world, and as soon as people start having fun in it, I can only imagine the freaking dopamine you get as a dungeon master or a lore master or a game master, and just to kind of see that happen. But I will say, going back to the One Ring, I think the one downside, though, to being such a fan of Tolkien, I think there's disadvantages and advantages to everything. The advantage was I knew the setting really, really well. For instance,
But on the downside, you're such a purist that you're afraid to do anything against it.
exactly. I took a while to even come up with even just like two ideas. I came up with two ideas. You guys seemed down for either idea, but it seemed like you guys were leaning toward the one we did, exploring the possibility of like a mini Plantier. But but I was able, because of my knowledge, I was able to kind of use Aragon, because I don't think, from what I read in the core rulebook, they don't talk about Aragon really, even though Aragon's roughly essentially part of Eriador, but they don't really talk about it. They kind of focus more just a little north of that.
I mean, they were probably trying to play it safe with canon characters and not do anything too crazy to piss off Tolkien buffs.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and I think that's the one thing about this system, that if you're playing with Tolkien purists, or people like myself, you have to allow a little bit of creative liberty, kind of like I know the Tolkien estate wasn't a big fan of the Lord of the Ring movies or The Hobbit, and I have my own opinions on The Hobbit, but I love the Lord of the Ring movies, and ultimately, while there was definitely differences, it was creative differences that still kept to the general spirit of what Tolkien was about. And when you're trying to have your own mark in that kind of world, you kind of have to. So especially with the One Ring setting, you can't be too purist.
I mean, that makes sense with how the Lord of the Rings trilogy ended up being like not only a staple, but like the core almost of an entire generation of the fantasy genre. I think that people really want to be able to keep it pure in a way. But I can also understand people wanting to deviate from it because it's been around for long enough now that people are starting to kind of get tired of the trope. So I could see people wanting to change it too.
As the lore master, especially the first time, and coming from reading so much Tolkien, I mean, my Tolkien shelf is just as big or bigger than my TTRPG shelf, and I run a whole TTRPG podcast, so hopefully that says something a little bit. But I think my biggest downfall was that I was so invested in the setting and the lore that as a lore master, when we started, I realized that at least mentally, I should have given more, at least just general thought to the actual story. I was so trying to fit something that could be canon-esque to Middle Earth, and not have anything that would have deviated from the main events of the books or core portions of the Third Age history. And so I was so focused on like, okay, I can go to Aragon, we can do a Plantier, but I didn't give as much thought as to the how we get there, why are we going there. And I think I did okay for my very first time as a lore master with a completely new system, especially from where I'm coming from and knowing who I am. But I definitely should have given a little bit more thought to the actual story, because I know right before we started recording, Afton kind of asked like, "Oh, why are we going to Rivendell?" And I kind of like, Círdan.
Because we are.
Círdan, yeah, like because I think I don't.
Because I need to go yell at Bilbo.
Yeah, and you were wanting to go yell at Bilbo and stuff like that, which it was great. I loved your backstory.
I don't know. Our wives seem to think it was a little obnoxious.
Hanar needs to go see a therapist, it seems, but
I don't know if he's going to be seeing one now after the one shot.
yeah. Well, I guess we'll kind of still see, because I don't know, because I love the system so much. Not only do I want to return to it just in general, but I still would love to return to the One Ring on the podcast, just as like an extra episode, or like a, hey, they came out with something new type thing. Let's explore that, just because it's such a fun system. And I know it's definitely geared toward Tolkien fans and Lord of the Rings fans, but I still think it was fun. I mean, I know Savannah Afton aren't the biggest Tolkien, Lord of the Rings fans, but they seem to have a really fun time.
They put up with it for their husbands that love Tolkien.
Yeah, but I still think they kind of surprised themselves too, though, how much they enjoyed playing. So I know Savannah had an absolute blast playing as a Dunedain Ranger.
Oh yeah, she got to play her female Aragorn.
I know she literally was. Genevieve was a female Aragorn. It was great. So I think they had more fun, and they're not necessarily huge fans, but they still had fun playing the system. So I think that can apply to a lot of other people that are just into TTRPG systems in general. And as I said,
in the end, that's what really matters when you're playing a TTRPG is you're there to have fun. Like there's no really doing it right or doing it wrong. If you're having fun, then you're having fun and just do what you're gonna do.
Exactly. And that's why I want to kind of say in this Loremaster, Gamemaster episode is that you don't have to be a Tolkien buff at all to be the Loremaster for the system. There might actually be a different potential advantage to not being too big of a buff.
I would say the perfect sweet spot would be knowing the area, but not like knowing everything.
Like somebody that enjoyed the movies, but maybe didn't maybe read the books once at some point, or at least read The Hobbit or something very casual. But no, they didn't read the Silmarillion. They didn't read Unfinished Tales. They didn't read the story of Beren and Luthien, which is the greatest love story in fantasy, in my opinion. But I divert. Somebody like that. But either way, somebody that doesn't know too much or doesn't think they know that much to jump into this kind of world. If you have friends that are interested in playing this, and or whatever, for whatever reason you find yourself deciding whether to do it or not, just go for it. Just try it one time, because they definitely do have some notes in the core rulebook about running one shots. This system, I think, is definitely geared toward mid to long term campaigns for sure.
Oh yeah, it's about storytelling. You can't tell a story in 2 hours.
No, and you can't. But there are things you can do for a one shot. Ideally we would have gotten back to Rivendell, but we honestly had a lot of fun in the combat. Well, I wasn't too sad about it. I think it still left on an interesting note.
Oh yeah, and I love seeing my boy Taryn make a comeback.
Yep.
It's always fun to throw him into the one shots. Spoilers. Yeah. He's in there like we try to do with all of them, in case you haven't listened to it.
Yeah, talk about breaking canon a little bit. Let's just throw a tiefling in.
So, getting into the meat of it, if you're wanting to be a lore master for the One Ring, how resource intensive is it? Like, what do you need to get to start?
Honestly, I think I had plenty to work with just the core rulebook. Unlike other systems, I feel like the core rulebook is very well-rounded for both players and game masters, or in this case, lore masters. Unlike Dungeons & Dragons, just a popular thing we can compare to.
Oh gosh, you need like the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Player's Handbook, like 5 different monster guides, there's all the supplements, like there's so much.
Yeah, there's like a little you definitely need the monster manual / Mordekainen's Tome of Foes.
Like you need a minimum of like 3 books to really get rolling.
Yeah, you might be able to get away with just like the Player's Handbook if you did like a very simple one-shot D&D thing, but if you were to go beyond that, you would need more resources. And honestly, online can only get you so far. Like I tried looking something up online for our D&D campaign the other night because I wanted to use something unique, but I couldn't because I just wanted something quick. I had the books. I could have used the books, but I was like, I have so much behind my screen because I'm that kind of DM. It's super messy back there, but do I really have any organization to it? Absolutely not.
Laptop gang.
I still want to use books, but I think having a laptop on the side would be really nice. So I may start potentially doing that here.
Oh, I love having a laptop to like run encounter trackers, like have everyone's character sheets up. Like it's so nice. But yeah, I'm a little new aged when it comes to that.
Yeah, I think I still am very old school, but I think I just want the option to use my laptop should something arise. But like I tried looking up stats for a type of dragon, one of the newer ones, and I found a couple websites, but they only had so much. I was like, oh, because a lot of times you can find full-blown stats. You can kind of bypass a lot of things. But if you're wanting to use unique stuff or have all the options, now you're going to have to get the book or the PDF from Wizards of the Coast or whatever company you're buying a TTRPG from.
I mean, it makes sense. If it's your intellectual property, you're going to want to be making your money off of it. But one problem that I personally had with the One Ring was I had a really hard time finding any supplemental materials for free online, like just quick character creation guide, like quick little combat tracker to see like how it works. Like there was almost no information I could find anywhere online without buying like the full book, which made it kind of discouraging for getting started because you have to either invest in the book or you don't get any of it.
I will say this as a potential runaround to that is that, like most things, there's a Facebook group or an Instagram group for almost anything out there. I found a really cool. I haven't dived too much into it. I just kind of joined and kind of am just an outskirter at the moment, just because I'm still, for all intents and purposes, I'm still new to the system. I could tell there's a lot of resources, a lot of people that just really love the One Ring and the Lord of the Rings, and they kind of just share stuff. It seems for the most part pretty wholesome, but they also have a link. And if you can't find the link, you can always ask somebody in the group. There's a One Ring Discord server that has quite a few people on it, and they have a lot of like homebrewed, not only homebrewed resources, but just like basic resources. Like that's where I found the cheat sheets for combat and cheat sheets for like ability checks. That's
They
where
were
I
still
found
useful.
those. Yeah, that's where I found those at. I had to do a little bit of digging, a little bit, just kind of skimming through until I found something that looked promising, read it, and be like, okay, that's about what I want. Download, save, print.
But like you have to find people who have the resources. You can't just find it online randomly.
Yeah, I'm just kind of throwing it out though, because if you had a hard time with that, I definitely want listeners to not be discouraged from trying the One Ring, because I already admitted that this is probably my favorite system. Honestly, I love the One
Hey, no
Ring.
harm, no foul. Just being honest.
Yeah, I know. That's a good thing for listeners to know. But even though it's hard to find online, that doesn't mean you still can't find resources still on the easier side. Honestly, like some other TTRPGs, worst case scenario, if you can't find resources online, some libraries might have it. I know libraries carry D&D stuff. I think a lot of them even carry Call of Cthulhu. So while it's not as popular as those ones, there's always a chance your local library might have it, or a used bookstore.
Doesn't hurt to look into.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt to look into. There's just, there are options. It's just not as, and I think part of it is just popularity. It's just not a super popular system. It comes from one of the better known indie companies, but it's nothing like Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder.
Yeah, but I'd say it definitely is able to set itself apart. Like there were some really cool mechanics in the One Ring that I enjoyed playing with. One that I really liked was the fellowship points. I thought those were so cool. That and like hope. Basically, it's kind of like inspiration in D&D, but you have like a party pool of it. It's kind of fun to use.
Yeah, and the fellowship points do slightly different things depending on your patron, because it's reflecting what your patron is wanting you to accomplish. So like Seardane is interested in collecting lore and artifacts. Bilbo's kind of the same way. But if you go to like if you're doing something for Gandalf, he's gonna have you be like, oh, we gotta rally the people to fight the shadow, It's a little different, balance kind of in between a little bit. And then, I mean, Tom Bombadil's a Patreon if you really want. And he's got a completely different agenda. So,
I mean, out of all the unique mechanics of the One Ring, which ones were your favorite?
I really liked Hope. I thought it was a cool resources, because one thing we noted while playing the system was that the target numbers were pretty high. They don't seem that high when you first go into it, but then you're like, oh, it's not a D20, it's a D12.
Yeah, when we were playing, there's a couple things I noticed with most of the target numbers. Unless you have 2 or 3 additional D6s, it's impossible to hit the target number unless you roll like max, which makes it a little discouraging at times.
So, I mean, technically, you can still succeed, at least in some way, even if you don't hit the target number, get the Gandalf rune. Like, the Loremaster may be like, yeah, let's do that, but that can be kind of disheartening a little bit.
You could say it wore on our hope a little bit.
Yeah. I was reading in the book right before recording here. I really should. I read through the book, but there's so much to learn. It's just something that didn't quite stick. But
Oh, you're never going to get it all on the first time.
oh yeah, no. There's a whole paragraph called "Tweaking the Target Numbers." It kind of implies kind of why it's so high, because if you think about it, Middle Earth you may not be in an area that's necessarily like war torn, but it has been war torn. There's still effects from those wars, hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. There's still lots of dangers. It's kind of like kind of one of the jokes is that in the movies, one of the quotes is that it's a dangerous road. And I remember somebody sitting next to me was like, I feel like all roads in Middle Earth are freaking dangerous according to these things. And I'm like, you actually aren't wrong per se.
I mean,
Like,
unless you're skipping down the street picking flowers in the Shire, that's usually a pretty safe place.
Yeah, Shire is a pretty safe place. Obviously, there's safe havens, even safer regions. But unless you're in like pretty heavily civilized areas, like in Gondor, for instance, or even Rohan, or the Shire, or Lindon, all the other areas are at the mercy of orc raids or bandits from the south or highwaymen or wolves, like, because the idea is, and it kind of reflects with, and I think that's why the hope and shadow mechanics in the game are so vital to creating the same sense as actual Middle Earth.
Oh, I think my favorite part about the hope and the shadow is trying to balance them. Like, I thought that was such a cool thematic mechanic where, like, you had these hope points that you can use to help you in your journey, but as you slowly lose hope, that shadow is going to slowly creep up on you, and you have to be careful because if you use too much of it, the shadow is going to overtake you. And I thought that thematically, that is so cool.
Yeah, that was beautiful. I was like, this is such a spirit of Tolkien mechanic. I'm like, I couldn't, if I had some experience as a game designer, I doubt I could have come up with anything better.
Like, if I were going to take anything out of this system, I'd probably throw out inspiration from D&D and bring in hope, shadow, and fellowship points.
I think at least hope and shadow are things that you could bring into other TTRPG systems for sure. Especially if you're in a setting where there's still light, there's still hope, there's still that real fighting chance, but the enemy kind of has the advantage, then that's a perfect mechanic for that. Kind of like how you can bring in like insanity from Call of Cthulhu into other TTRPGs. It kind of stands on its own a little bit. So it's definitely one of the mechanics we would recommend that even if you don't like this system, but thought some of the mechanics were cool, it's probably Hope and Shadow, because that's one we did talk about both in earlier episodes and definitely mentioned in the actual play. Just bringing that into other TTRPG systems for sure.
I also did like how your load wears on your endurance. I thought that was kind of a cool little thought because in D&D, like, as long as you're not encumbered, like, over your weight limit, it doesn't matter how much you're carrying. You could be carrying a horse if you're strong enough, and it will not affect you whatsoever.
Yeah, you could have 1 hit point out of 50, and as long as you have the strength modifier to carry a horse, you're still carrying a horse, even though technically you're on the verge of unconsciousness death. Like,
yeah. I feel like the endurance mechanic in the One Ring is more realistic as well.
Yeah, for sure. I like that too. To say one more thing about the target numbers, I think the target numbers were kind of high just because it's, instead of leveling up, and this is something Brandon brought up earlier before recording, was instead of like straight up level up where you just kind of gain powers like in D&D or maybe in other systems, it's more like Call of Cthulhu where you just kind of, you level up, but it's more like you just kind of get slightly better at what you already kind of know how to do or have been introduced to. Like it's a more natural, realistic progression than like a paladin suddenly gaining the ability to just smite things like 3 times as hard out of nowhere. Like, what?
Random holy power.
I know. That's not annoying at all.
As a paladin, I endorse this message. I love my paladins.
my gods approve. But one thing I kind of wish I had implemented with our one shot is that this is definitely a system that's meant for mid to long term campaigns. It can definitely be used for one shots like we used, but it's definitely hard to not only get to everything but to remember everything, especially when you're newer. If this was a long term campaign, I think things would have gone a little more smoothly, a lot less pressure and intense on everybody.
Well, it's because our characters didn't have a chance to grow into it. We threw baby adventurers to the wolves to see how they did. Obviously, it didn't do too well.
I don't know, man. I mean,
okay, the girls did great. Hanar, he struggled in combat.
But one thing I will say that if anybody wants to do a one shot with this system is this wonderful quote that I should have read and implemented. For shorter campaigns or one-shot games, the players and their Loremaster may agree to derive the target numbers by subtracting their attributes from 18 instead of 20. So technically all your target numbers in this case as a one-shot should have been at least 2 under. So people that had a 15 target number, it should have been 13. Which,
yeah, that would have made a huge difference.
yeah, it would have made a huge difference. It would have made a lot of things easier. But again, it's not necessarily, at least theatrically, it's not too off from, exploring the, because, it's kind of like what Aragorn said, where are we going? Into the wilds. Like, literally outside of a town proper, it's the wild. There's no nation in Eriador. Like, the Elves of Lindon kind of have a country nation over there.
It's kind of like there's just pockets of civilization in the wilds. There's not like a set, like, guarded, safe, paved roads or anything between cities. It's like you have your pockets or you have the wild. That's it.
Yeah, and honestly, in the Lord of the Ring books, one of the things that Tolkien states is that one of the sayings in Eriador is because when people comment on the ruins or the roads or say something, a common phrase to that is, "Oh, it'll get fixed when a king returns." The king hasn't been there for like a couple thousand years. Like,
I mean, they have one now after Lord of the Rings.
yeah, technically Aragorn reclaimed all of Eriador under essentially the same banner. I mean, that's a pretty big area to govern, though. So who knows what happened later on in the Fourth Age? But at least
I'm honestly, I will not lie. I would love to have some content on the Fourth Age from the mind of Tolkien, and I'm kind of sad that we'll never get that.
Well, we almost did, actually. Fun fact: Tolkien started a like a novella set in the Fourth Age about during the reign. I can't remember if it's during the reign of Aragorn's son or his grandson, but one of the two. So a couple hundred years after the fact, at least. The story was called The New Shadow, and he got about like 3 or 4 pages in. But the problem with the way the mythology of Middle Earth worked is that the threats got lesser and lesser. So like Sauron's the second Dark Lord, but if you compare him to Morgoth, his master, who was the first Dark Lord, holy cow, Morgoth's way scarier than Sauron. But
yeah, they kind of solved everything, so we don't really know what would come up. But also, as Tolkien, I'm sure he could have come up with some really cool threat.
I mean, he could have, but the elves were leaving. Kind of magic was kind of leaving in a sense because it was the Age of Men. Because the idea is that Middle Earth becomes our world. That was kind of the idea, roughly. So when he started the New Shadow, he just was like, "This is just not." Essentially, he was like, as interesting this could be to explore, it really wasn't worth his time. He would have rather spent more time flushing out more about the first age or the second age of Middle Earth. So
I guess that makes sense. I can see
he
that.
quickly abandoned it. I think you can find those pages online, or at least synopsis of them, which the synopsis therefore is only like 3 paragraphs long, like a summary. But it's kind of interesting. The idea is that people are kind of still forming kind of dark cults, but that's about as bad as it gets. Like, there's no other Dark Lord or other like worldwide threat. I mean, as you said, there could have been some fun things. I mean, I can already think of something like an adventure set in the Fourth Age I think would kind of be really interesting, but I have to do quite a bit of homebrewing.
Hey, maybe if we ever do a One Ring campaign, you could throw that out.
Yeah, I probably would want to do at least another a couple one shots, or at least like a mini campaign, like a 3 to 4 session one before even attempting that. Just to get my boots a little bit more wet.
Nah, man, trial by fire. It's the best way to do it.
I mean, there's something to that, but it depends. So, but who knows? But yeah, that's kind of some of the things. I kind of wish I'd focused more on story. I think the other thing too with target numbers is that the system, as you kind of said, as you use hope, you get closer to becoming miserable or letting the shadow overtake you. But the thing is that if you don't use hope at all, you're also screwed.
You're screwed. You need hope.
Yeah, you need hope, but you can't. You have to be kind of almost like realistic about it. It's definitely, and I think that's a thing that encourages more role play. Maybe not like detailed role play, but at least more like well thought out broad role play as far as like how is my character going to be this session if they spend hope doing stuff? So the system encourages you to use hope, but it's also warning you don't get too crazy with it.
Yeah, you got to be sparing.
Yeah, and I think there might be there's definitely ways to regain hope. I think if you take long rest, you could potentially you don't gain all your hope back, not like D&D where long rests are just the most magical thing on earth, so I don't understand why there's clerics in the D&D world, because long rests just fix everything. In this system, you still gain some stuff back, but not everything. The other thing we didn't really use was there were instances, I think there was at least one, I don't remember exactly when, but I think there was one instance where it might have been Hanar. It should have been you should have gotten wounded, but we never utilized that, and therefore never really explored that combat sub mechanic.
I mean, we didn't really have enough time for the wound to have really mattered in the end, but I get that.
That's true, because wounded in game could last days.
That's more of a long-term story consequence.
Yeah, and that's fair. That's fair, but just to kind of throw it out there, we didn't get to it, obviously, but but you're right, we didn't really have a whole lot of time on it. So the other thing too is that with those successes, those sixes or those elvish symbols, I didn't realize this, that not only do they allow you to do additional damage or cool feats in combat, they also allow you to do cool things outside of combat.
I mean, I guess that makes sense.
So with the target numbers being kind of, especially so if you're doing like a longer campaign, so therefore your target numbers are higher, not only do you have hope to pull from, fellowship points to pull from to help with that, people can help you and gain additional d6s from characters helping you. If your direct fellowship companion, I can't remember off the top of my head what it's called, but your fellowship focus, if they help you, then you gain even more d6s. You gain 2d6, I believe. If
Dang.
you can. Yeah, and some of these mechanics depends on being able to narratively justify why, which most people, it's not something that you really need to be stingy about, You could do that. For instance, another one is if you roll success, one of the abilities that you can use at 6 for, not only does it still count as a 6, but you can use it for something. If a skill roll involves multiple players, you help another player hero who failed. The failed roll is considered a success. So if everybody's making awareness checks and somebody rolled a 6 and somebody else failed, they can be like, I'm going to spend that success to make them succeed.
That is pretty cool.
Honestly, compared to Dungeons and Dragons, the One Ring system does a lot better of a job giving you mechanical opportunities and options and encouragements
for teamwork.
To role play with your table.
Yeah, that's one thing I've noticed that D&D doesn't do great is like it's all about the individual characters kind of collaboratively working together, but they don't work together.
Yeah, it's kind of like what we said earlier, I think in our Fate episodes, was D&D doesn't do a good job on the roleplay side. At least it definitely encourages roleplay. I'm not saying that, but there's no mechanics or any immediate benefit other than be friends with those at your table. Which I think it's important to have some kind of because I feel like Fate and Fate Accelerated do a much better job encouraging roleplay amongst the players mechanically.
Oh yeah.
Because if you're doing that, then I feel like that's going to affect your friendship also outside of the table. Like when you leave the table, like it's going to help build that a little bit better.
I mean, that's kind of one of the main purposes of TTRPGs is to get together with a group of friends and have good times together and build memories.
But also extend those friendships beyond the table, ideally too. Not just at the table, but because I had D&D friends that I realized weren't actually really they were very friends. I think they were convinced we were friends, but I realized in reality we weren't really friends outside of the table.
Yeah, outside the table, it's like you barely know each other. It's like a classmate at school. Like when you're sitting next to each other in the desks, like you're BFFs, but as soon as like you leave the classroom, it's like you don't even know them.
Or like work friends.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I feel like the One Ring, kind of like Fate Accelerated, I feel like provides actual mechanical reasons to role play and encourage interactions and encourage friendships within the game, which then encourage friendships at the table, which really, because it's pushing it so much in a good way, it extends beyond the table, ideally.
You build a real life fellowship.
Yeah, you build a real life fellowship. Yeah, and I think that's the goal with the One Ring, is you build like kind of almost this real life fellowship, without the risk of being stabbed by a rusty blade from an orc. You don't got to worry about that.
But overall, the One Ring system is pretty solid. As you can tell, we've both really enjoyed it. But I think we should save some of our opinions when we do our official review episode up next.
Yeah,
So-
sorry. I think I made
It's
it.
okay.
I don't think I needed to gush so much. I don't think I needed to say how much I liked it, because I feel like I was gushing over it so much this episode that people are like, you didn't have to say you liked it, man. We can just tell you really like it.
Oh yeah, but it's still nice to dive into the nitty gritty when we do that review and see exactly what we do and don't like about it.
Mhm.
But hopefully we're able to give you guys some good insights on what it's like to really play the One Ring, and some help with running the game, being the Loremaster, and what that's like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So our next episode will be our final review of the system, which I feel like this episode's a pretty dang good preview of what's going to happen in that episode. But we'll give you we'll give numbers. Not that the numbers really mean anything on this podcast, but if you're a number person, maybe you'll get more out of it with those numbers. And
We got to go more in depth with the specific likes and dislikes instead of just general feelings.
yeah, another thing we can do too in the next episode is talk about what other supplements or books or resources are out there. I know we kind of touched on it with what free resources are out there, which doesn't sound like there's a whole lot, unfortunately. They're out there, you just kind of have to look for it a little bit more. But we can still talk about like other resources, because there's more than just the core rulebook, and we can kind of do a quick touch on those as well next episode.
Yeah, so thank you guys for joining us and listen to us ramble about Tolkien for half an hour. Hopefully you guys were able to get something useful out of it, and we really have enjoyed the One Ring, and we're looking forward to coming back with it next time. Hopefully you guys check us out on social media. We have lots of stuff, and we have a lot of fun getting to interact with you guys.
No, absolutely. I know there's been a lot going on in both me and Brandon's life right now. That's kind of why we had a 2-week hiatus a little bit ago. And so our social media has also kind of suffered the ripples from that as well. So we appreciate you guys bearing with us and being patient with us and just kind of sticking around. So it means a lot. We're definitely a very, very small podcast, but the fact that people seem to be tuning in pretty, there's at least a handful of people coming in regularly. We really appreciate it. And I hope you guys are gaining just as much as we are and having just as much fun as we are. It definitely means a lot. So as Brandon said, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and also Threads. Threads is definitely the one that I have no idea what to do with, honestly, because I was never a Twitter person.
Oh, same. I never used Twitter in my life before Threads existed.
X? Is it X? I think it's X now or something.
Oh yeah, they changed it.
Yeah, because reasons. But it's definitely very different. And I mean, I've always been a Facebook. I only got into Instagram because of the podcast.
Oh, same. I only go on Instagram for like memes and reels.
Yeah, I know. You send me so many reels, man.
Hey, that's how you know I'm a real friend.
That's what I watch in between pools during the day job, man.
Well, I'm glad I could help.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
But yeah, check us out on social media, you guys. Nat One Nerds Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Threads. We're always happy to hear from you. You can reach out to us either there or at natonenerdspodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from you. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, we'll take all of them. We're just happy to hear from you guys. So thanks again for tuning in.
But if you like what we're doing overall, leaving us a high rating on Spotify and Apple Podcast or even Good Pods, I think are kind of the bigger ones that do actual reviews. Leaving it on that, or if you use other podcasters, at least sharing them with your friends. That's huge. That's probably the biggest compliment we can get. It gives us hope. So
He saves us from the shadow.
Yeah, it gives us an extra D6 for the month. So we can use all the help we can get, and we're glad you guys are along for the ride. But yeah, anything else, Brandon?
I think that's it until next time. We hope you get to have a good time listening to this, and we'll see you soon.
Happy rolling, guys.